It was a mission that had already pushed a bomber crew to its absolute limit. A punishing raid deep into enemy territory, flak tearing the sky apart, and the constant, gnawing fear of German fighters. But for the 10 men of a lone B-17 flying fortress, the real battle for survival would begin only after they had turned for home. A catastrophic malfunction left them with a single, horrifying question. How do you land a 25-ton aircraft when its wheels have simply disappeared? This is the story of absolute desperation and brilliant, unorthodox courage. A story of physics defied and a life-saving gamble made at 160 miles per hour. When his B-17's wheels fell off, this pilot landed on a bomb bay. Our story takes us to the bitter, costly winter of 1943. The 8th Air Force is bleeding over Europe, the Luftwaffe's defenses growing more lethal by the day. The target for February 28th is the heavily defended industrial city of Brunswick, Germany. Among the hundreds of bombers droning east that day is B-17F-65, BO, serial number 42 to 29,649, nicknamed Wabash Cannonball. She belongs to the 360th Bomb Squadron, 303rd Bombardment Group, based at Molesworth, England. At her controls is 21-year-old First Lieutenant John J.G. Myers, a farm boy from Pennsylvania whose steady hands and calm demeanor had already earned him the trust of his crew. His men are the typical cross-section of American youth thrust into a global war. The co-pilot, Second Lieutenant John A. Walters, the navigator, bombardier, and the 5 enlisted men manning the radio room and the gun turrets. The engineer, the ball turret gunner, the waist gunners. 10 lives bound together inside an aluminum-skinned fortress. The mission to Brunswick unfolds with the grim predictability of a 1943 deep penetration raid. Intense, accurate flak blankets the formation over the target. Wabash Cannonball shudders from nearby concussions but presses on, releasing its bombs. The turn for home brings no relief. Then, the chilling call from the ball turret gunner, Staff Sergeant Michael Z. Karpovich. Fighters. 9 o'clock high. A swarm of Focke-Wulf FW-190s slices into the formation. Tracers stitch the cold sky. For 15 harrowing minutes, the gunners scream warnings, the .50 calibers hammer, and Myers throws the heavy bomber into evasive maneuvers. They claim one fighter probably destroyed, but the price is steep. A 20mm cannon shell from a FW-190 rips into the left wing. Another explodes near the tail. Damage is reported, but the fortress remains flyable. The fighters, low on fuel and ammunition, break off. The immediate threat is over. The crew begins to believe they might just make it back to Molesworth. But an unseen, more insidious danger was lurking. The cannon fire had severed crucial hydraulic lines and damaged the left main landing gear assembly. As they crossed the white cliffs of Dover, a place that usually signaled safety, the flight engineer went through the pre-landing checklist. He lowered the landing gear. The right main gear and the nose gear locked down with a reassuring thump. The left main gear indicator light remained stubbornly dark. "Skipper, left gear is red," the co-pilot reported, his voice tense. Myers ordered the engineer to cycle the gear. The hydraulic motor whined, but the light stayed red. A cold dread began to seep into the cockpit. They were low on fuel, battered, and now potentially crippled. Myers made a decision. He would not risk a belly landing with a full crew and a damaged, fuel-laden aircraft if there was any alternative. He diverted to RAF Manston, a coastal airfield in Kent famously known as the Emergency Field. Manston had the longest runway in England and specialist crash crews on permanent standby. It was the place for a wounded bird to come home. As Wabash Cannonball entered the traffic pattern over Manston, Myers contacted the tower. "Manston Tower, this is Army 29649, a damaged B-17. We have a left main gear failure. Request low pass for visual inspection." The tower cleared them, and Myers brought the bomber down to just 50 feet off the deck, thundering past the control tower. The ground crews and crash officers trained their binoculars. What they saw sent a chill through them. The left wheel was down, but it was canted at a grotesque, useless angle. Worse, as the bomber passed, sunlight glinted off something falling from the strut. A chunk of metal? A piece of the tire? The tower radioed back. "Army 29649. We confirm your left gear is down, but appears severely damaged. The wheel itself looks unstable. You are cleared to orbit. Stand by for further instructions. For the next hour, Myers and his crew circled the field, burning precious fuel, while the experts on the ground conferenced. A crash crew chief suggested a risky maneuver: fly over a soft, muddy field adjacent to the runway, drag the left gear through the mud, and hope the friction would snap it straight. Myers attempted it twice. The gear refused to budge. The tension inside the bomber was now palpable. The adrenaline from the air battle had long since faded, replaced by a grinding, exhausting anxiety. Then, at precisely 1,547 hours, the crisis escalated. On the third low pass, the tower's voice crackled with new urgency. 29,649, abort. Abort your approach. Your left wheel, it's gone. I repeat, the left wheel has completely separated from the strut. The bomb bay doors were still open from the attempted gear-dragging maneuver. The cold English wind whistled through the cavernous opening. Myers pulled the bomber back into a shaky climb. In the cockpit, he and Walters exchanged a glance. The situation had just entered the realm of the impossible. They were now flying a B-17 with only two functional landing points, the nose wheel and the right main wheel. A landing on the conventional tricycle gear was now a physical impossibility. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable. The asymmetry would cartwheel the aircraft the moment the right gear touched tarmac, resulting in a catastrophic fireball. Back in the fuselage, the crew felt the abrupt climb and the change in engine pitch. Word passed quickly from the cockpit. The wheel fell off. The reality of their predicament settled over the men like a physical weight. They were trapped in a machine that could no longer land. Some began writing quick notes to loved ones. The ball turret gunner, Karpovich, was ordered to rotate his turret and exit it, a near-impossible task in flight, as the turret would likely be crushed in any landing attempt. The crash crews at Manston scrambled. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the runway. Foam trucks prepared to blanket the concrete. The station commander and senior engineering officers huddled in the tower. Every textbook procedure, every manual, stated that this scenario meant only one outcome: a controlled crash, with a high probability of fatalities. They advised Myers to order the crew to bail out over the English Channel, now just a few miles to the east, and let the bomber ditch itself. But Myers refused. The Channel waters in February were lethally cold. His men were exhausted. Some might be wounded. Their Mae Wests might not save them from hypothermia or drowning. He had brought them this far. He would not order them into a freezing sea if there was any other way. "We're bringing her in," he told the tower. "We just need to figure out how." For Lieutenant John Myers, the next 20 minutes were a period of intense, focused calculation, under the heaviest burden of command. The lives of 9 men rested on his next decision. He requested, and was granted, permission to continue orbiting Manston while he and his co-pilot devised a plan. The problem was one of basic geometry and force. The B-17 needed 3 points of contact to land level. They had only 2, and those 2 were on the same side of the aircraft's centerline. The left side of the bomber would plummet to the runway the instant the right gear made contact. The solution, therefore, was not to prevent the left side from falling. That was inevitable, but to control how and where it fell. They needed to create a third point of contact on the left side, something strong enough to bear the weight and friction of a 160-mile-per-hour landing, something that could slide. Myers's eyes fell upon the cockpit control for the bomb bay doors. An idea, born of sheer desperation and ingenious understanding of his aircraft, began to form. What if they could use the bomb bay itself? Not the doors, which were flimsy and would shred instantly, but the massive, reinforced central keel beam of the aircraft that ran between the 2 bomb bays. This was the structural spine of the fortress. It was designed to carry tons of ordnance. Could it bear the weight of the aircraft's left side, sliding on concrete? He called his flight engineer forward. Together, they visualized the bomber's underbelly. The forward and rear bomb bays were separated by a narrow catwalk. The keel beam was just inches above that catwalk. If they could land with the left side precisely angled so that this beam took the brunt of the impact, it might just work. But it required a landing attitude that defied all procedure. They would have to touch down on the right main wheel only, holding the left wing high as long as humanly possible, letting the right gear and the nose gear take the initial weight. Then, as the aircraft slowed and the right wing's lift diminished, the left wing would begin to drop. The keel beam would make contact, and the entire left side of the B-17 would scrape along the runway in a shower of sparks. It was a plan that sounded more like a controlled demolition than an aircraft landing. One mistake in angle, one gust of crosswind, one slightly uneven application of the right wheel's brakes, and the bomber would ground loop and disintegrate. The fuel in the left wing tanks could ignite. The bomb bay could buckle, snapping the aircraft in two. Myers explained the plan to the tower and to his crew over the intercom. His voice was calm, steady. He instructed every man to assume crash positions, braced against main spar bulkheads, away from the skin of the fuselage where tearing metal would be deadly. He ordered the ball turret gunner to stay clear of his station and the waist gunners to secure their weapons. Below, at Manston, the crash crews listened in disbelief. The tower cleared all runways. The head crash officer, a veteran of dozens of incidents, later said he had never heard of such an attempt. He ordered his foam trucks to stand by, but to hold their spray. Foam would make the runway too slippery for the delicate balancing act about to unfold. All they could do was watch and wait. Wabash Cannonball made its final turn onto the main runway approach. It was 1,620 hours. The landing gear selector was set to down, but only 2 green lights shone on the panel. The bomb bay doors remained open, a yawning maw that would soon meet the ground. Myers reduced power, beginning his descent. The runway, 9,000 feet of concrete, stretched out before him, a narrow ribbon of hope. Flaps down, Myers ordered. Walters complied. The aircraft slowed further, its stall speed creeping closer. The key was to keep the right wing low, the left wing high, for as long as possible. This meant flying in a permanent, slight right bank, counteracting the natural tendency of the damaged, lighter left side to drop. The threshold rushed up. Cutting power, Myers said, pulling the throttles to idle. The deafening roar of the 4 right cyclones faded to a whine. The silence was more terrifying than the flak had been. The right main wheel made first contact with a squeal of rubber and a puff of smoke. A perfect touchdown. A fraction of a second later, the nose wheel settled onto the tarmac. The B-17 was now racing down the runway, balanced like a bicycle on its right side. Myers and Walters fought the controls, using aileron and rudder to keep the left wing elevated. The airspeed bled off, 140, 130, 120 miles per hour. As the speed dropped, the lift under the right wing decreased. The left wing, held aloft by nothing but airflow and sheer pilot strength, began its inexorable descent. The men inside heard a new sound, a low, grinding screech of metal on concrete. It started at the front of the bomb bay and raced aft. The keel beam had made contact. A torrent of sparks, visible to the crew in the waist windows, erupted from beneath them, flying past like fiery hail. The aircraft shuddered violently, a deafening roar of tearing aluminum filling the fuselage. The left wingtip scraped the runway, then caught, acting as a pivot. For a heart-stopping second, it seemed the bomber would indeed twist and flip. But Myers and Walters, anticipating this, applied gentle right brake and right rudder. They steered into the drag. The Fortress, now sliding on its keel beam and right wheel, straightened its course. The screeching continued for what felt like an eternity, over 2,000 feet of sliding on bare metal. The friction was tremendous, slowing the aircraft rapidly. Finally, with a last shuddering groan, the bomber came to a complete stop, tilted heavily to its left side, a long, jagged scar of gouged metal marking its path down the runway. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the ping of cooling metal and the distant sirens of approaching vehicles. For a moment, no one inside moved. Then, Myers's voice came over the intercom, calm as ever. "Everybody okay? Report in." One by one, shaken but miraculously unhurt voices answered. From the tail gunner to the navigator in the nose, all 10 men were alive. Not a single serious injury. They evacuated rapidly, sliding out of the right side waist gun door and dropping to the intact right wing, then to the ground, away from the potential fire and fumes. They gathered on the grass, watching as fire crews doused the smoldering left side of their aircraft. Wabash Cannonball was a total loss, her fuselage spine twisted and torn, but she had fulfilled her final, most important mission. She brought her crew home. The engineering officers who inspected the wreck were astounded. The keel beam was ground down by inches, but it had held. Myers's intuitive understanding of his aircraft's structural strength had been perfect. He had turned the bomb bay from a vulnerability into a landing skid. For this act of extraordinary airmanship, unparalleled presence of mind, and devotion to his crew, First Lieutenant John G. Myers was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. His citation reads, "By exceptional skill and determination, he successfully landed his damaged aircraft in a manner contrary to all standard procedures, thereby saving the lives of his entire crew." The story of Wabash Cannonball became legendary within the 8th Air Force, a testament to the never-give-up ethos of the bomber crews. It proved that even in a war dominated by machinery and mass production, the ingenuity and courage of a single individual could defy the odds. The bomber was scrapped, but the 10 men who flew her that day went on to complete their tours of duty, their lives extended by the cool-headed heroism of a 21-year-old pilot from Pennsylvania. This was the day a pilot, faced with an impossible equation, found a solution written in the very bones of his aircraft. It is just one of countless untold stories of ingenuity and survival from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.